Jax Quillen stood knee-deep in the kind of existential crisis only an interstellar engineer could appreciate. Somewhere in the bowels of Wormhole Station 47, a machine was making noises that suggested it was either dying or attempting to sing karaoke. Neither option was particularly pleasant. "You think the damn thing could at least carry a tune," Jax muttered, yanking his spanner with a grunt. The tool slipped and he narrowly avoided smashing his own face in. More careful next time, he thought sarcastically. The station was crowded. Alien refugees from a dozen species, each with their own aroma, none of them good, packed into every corner. They were here to escape various intergalactic calamities, which was understandable. Less understandable was why they thought standing in line for the last functioning toilet was preferable to whatever hellscape they'd fled. Jax wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead, smudging grease across his brow. He could feel the station's tension in the recycled air, a collective dread, as if everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop, or perhaps an entire boot. "Hey, Quillen," a voice barked from above. It was Glarf, a Tellurian with 3 eyes and a mouth set permanently to disapproving parent. "You fixing that flux regulator or wrestling it into submission? We got systems flickering like a drunk on a Friday night." "I'm giving it a stern talking to, Glarf," Jax replied, glancing up, "but it doesn't seem to respect authority figures much." Glarf snorted, a sound like a cat gargling marbles. "Well, if it starts asking for a lawyer, we're screwed." Jax returned to the task, hands probing the guts of the machine. He'd been an engineer long enough to know when something was off, and right now nothing was quite sitting right. Systems across the station were glitching with disturbing frequency, lights dimming, doors refusing to open, holoscreens flickering like deranged fireflies. Rumors were swirling faster than a whirlpool in a black hole, whispers of a secret project, something targeting humans specifically. The words digitization and creativity were thrown around like confetti, but nobody seemed to know what they actually meant. "Maybe it's a new alien reality show," Jax had joked at the last crew meeting. "My mun is on humans," the musical, but the laughter had been thin, strained. Nervous undercurrents suggested this was something bigger, darker, and when aliens started getting nervous, humans had a right to be downright terrified. The station's alarms blared suddenly, a shriek that echoed through the corridors. Jax dropped his spanner, the clang drowned out by the din. "Great," he muttered. "Just what we need, a soundtrack." He stood, dusting off his hands on his jumpsuit. "Guess that's my cue," he said to no one in particular, and made his way through the throngs of twitchy aliens. The command center was chaos. Panic hovered in the air like a particularly persistent stench. Jax pushed his way through, earning a few glares and one elbow to the ribs until he reached the main console. "What's going on?" he asked, barely audible over the cacophony. Glarf was already there, eyes scanning data streams with the intensity of a gambler on a losing streak. "Power fluctuations across sectors," he rattled off, "and we've lost contact with the outer relay stations." "Well, that's just peachy," Jax replied, sarcasm thick as molasses. "You think it's the same glitch messing with my karaoke machine. If this is karaoke, we're in the wrong timeline," Glarf shot back. "Get your ass in gear, Quillen. We need those relays back online or we're sitting ducks." Jax nodded, not that anyone was paying attention. He grabbed a toolkit and headed for the maintenance shaft, his mind a whirlwind of half-formed plans and fully formed expletives. The shaft was narrow, built for someone with a smaller frame and even smaller sense of self-preservation. Jack squeezed through, the walls pressing in like a bad conscience. He could hear the hum of the station around him, a white noise symphony that was equal parts soothing and ominous. He reached the relay junction, a tangled mess of wires and panels that looked more like a modern art installation gone rogue. "All right, you metal bastard," Jack said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see what makes you tick." As he worked, his thoughts drifted back to the rumors. Digitization, human creativity. It sounded like the plot of a bad sci-fi novel, the kind he'd hidden under his mattress as a kid, but fiction had a nasty habit of becoming reality in the universe's less polite corners. "Maybe they're just trying to steal our dance moves," Jax mused aloud, stripping a wire with practiced ease. "Or maybe our alien overlords finally want to understand why we keep making sequels to movies that should have stopped at one." He paused, rewired a connection, and hit the reset. The panel flickered to life, lights blinking in a sequence that was, if not reassuring, at least less ominous. "There we go," he murmured, wiping his hands. "One problem at a time." But as he turned to leave, a thought gnawed at him. What if it wasn't about stealing but stopping? Human creativity was a wild, unpredictable thing, dangerous even, and in a galaxy governed by order and hierarchy, unpredictability was rarely welcome. The station shuddered, a ripple that traveled through metal and bone. Jax grabbed onto a rail, heart pounding in a less than comforting rhythm. "Yes, that's not foreboding at all," he muttered, forcing his feet to move. Back in the chaos of the command center, Glarf was barking orders, trying to herd the panicked masses into some semblance of control. Jax joined him, their voices lost in the tide. Got the relays stable, he reported, panting slightly. But something's still off. Tell me something I don't know, Glarf replied, rubbing his temples. I swear if we survive this, I'm retiring to a nice, quiet planet where the greatest excitement is watching grass grow. Make sure it's a planet with grass first, Jax said, trying for a smile and failing, or at least a good bar. Glarf managed a grunt that might have been a laugh. Don't worry if you find one, send me a postcard. As the station system slowly recovered, a sense of fragile calm settled over the command center. But it was the kind of calm that preceded a storm, a lull before the universe decided to throw another wrench in the works, and Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. As if the universe had decided that the humans were too creative for their own good and was preparing to teach them a lesson. Just another day in paradise, Jax muttered, crossing his arms as he surveyed the chaos. Let's hope the next chapter has fewer glitches and more answers, but deep down he knew better. The universe had never been that kind. Jax Quillen was elbow-deep in chaos once more. If the universe was a stand-up comedian, it was the type who never knew when to leave the stage. After stabilizing the relay, he'd hoped for a brief respite, a chance to kick back with a lukewarm cup of recycled coffee and ponder his life choices. Instead, he got more alarms, more glitches, and now, a fresh conspiracy theory hotter than a neutron star. He stood in a cramped briefing room, crammed next to Glarf, and a handful of human refugees who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Not that Jax blamed them, he'd rather be anywhere else too. But here they were, squeezed together like sardines in a tin, that hadn't been properly tested for leaks. We've got a situation, folks, Jax announced, trying to sound authoritative and not like a man who just learned about this situation 5 minutes ago. Apparently there's a group of aliens, the Zintrix, who have decided that human minds are the next big thing in the intergalactic commodities market. Great, muttered a voice from the back. I always wanted to be a collectible. Jax ignored the snark, concentrating on the matter at hand. From what we've gathered, they're trying to digitize human creativity, package it up nice and neat, like a box set of questionable decisions. Glarf chimed in, his expression the same blend of irritation and exasperation he wore while playing babysitter to Jax. The Zintrix think our creativity is dangerous, unpredictable, like a toddler with a flamethrower. Lovely, Jax said, rolling his eyes. Spontaneity is now a crime against the universe. He scanned the room, reading the mix of anger, disbelief, and resignation on the refugees' faces. Not exactly the cheerleading squad one hoped for when facing a galactic threat. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and Jax had a job to do. So the plan is simple, Jax continued, trying to keep his voice steady. We need to disrupt their operations, sabotage their systems, and generally make their lives as miserable as mine feels right now. A young woman with bright eyes and a permanent scowl, two things that shouldn't coexist so naturally, raised her hand. And how exactly do we do that? We don't even know where they are, Jax shrugged. Details. We start by hacking their systems. It's like engineering, but with more yelling at computers. Glarf snorted, a sound Jax was coming to associate with impending doom. More like engineering with a side of death wish. Hey, it's not like we have better options, Jax shot back. And besides, they're underestimating us. We've got the element of surprise and a whole lot of pent-up frustration. We can work with that. The group broke into murmured conversations, plans forming in fits and starts. It reminded Jax of those old heist movies, the ones where a ragtag group of misfits banded together against impossible odds. The difference here was that their odds were worse, and their leader didn't have a cool nickname like the Brain or the Boss. Just Jax the engineer, with a knack for trouble and an existential crisis that could probably fill its own book. The dusty, dimly lit corridors of Wormhole Station 47 hummed with activity, the bustle less organized and more frantic than any reasonable person would find comforting. Jax led the makeshift resistance cell, which was less cell and more collection of people who didn't refuse fast enough. As they moved, Jax half expected the Zintrix to beam down from above, shouting something like, "Surprise, it's your turn to be part of the cosmic digital library." But the corridors remained quiet, if not peaceful, the kind of quiet that whispered promises of impending doom. "So you really think this is going to work?" the young woman from earlier asked, doubt practically dripping from her words. Jax sighed. "Nope, but doing nothing seems like a worse idea. Besides, I like a good underdog story." "Is that what we are?" she asked. "Underdogs feels more like undercooked to me." "Semantics," Jax replied with a shrug. "But if it makes you feel better, think of this as an adventure. A really crappy, possibly lethal adventure." They reached the old data center, a relic from a time when the station was less of a refugee resort and more of a legitimate waypoint for travelers. The door creaked open, revealing rows of outdated servers and flickering screens. "Ah, vintage tech," Jax said with a grin. Bet the Zintrix didn't count on this prehistoric wonder. Glarf stared at the dusty machinery, clearly unimpressed. Yeah, I'm sure this will save the day right before it implodes from sheer obsolescence. Jax ignored him, already busy pulling up schematics and data streams. The Zintrix's digital tendrils were everywhere, a web of control and interference that even Jax had to admit was impressive. Okay, folks, he said, fingers flying over the keyboard. Let's see if we can't unplug these bastards from our heads. The young woman, who had introduced herself as Kira in a moment of hesitant camaraderie, leaned over his shoulder. This is insane. Welcome to my life, Jax replied, trying not to flinch as a stray spark jumped from a wire and nearly took his eye out. But hey, insanity is just creativity with better PR. As they worked, the rest of the group took up positions around the room, keeping a wary eye on the door. Jax knew they were scared. Hell, he was scared, but they didn't have much choice. Not unless they wanted to become the latest edition of humanity, now in convenient digital format. Jax tapped into the network, bypassing firewalls that should have been outlawed for cruelty. Kira watched, clearly fascinated, or terrified. It was hard to tell the difference sometimes. How long do you think we have? She asked, her voice a low whisper. Until what? Jax asked. Until they find us, or until we all decide this was a terrible idea and go get drinks instead. Either, Jax smirked. Well, if we're lucky, we'll get a warning before the Zintrix realize we're meddling. If not, just assume we have until the next alarm or explosion, whichever comes first. The room filled with tension, the kind that made every creak in the walls sound like a countdown to disaster. Jax was used to it, but the others weren't. He could see it in their eyes, the way they shifted, hoping to spot an escape plan that didn't exist. He'd found something, though, a backdoor into the Zintrix's communications. Not perfect, but enough to get a glimpse of their operations. Enough to maybe, just maybe, throw a wrench or a spanner in his case into their plans. Got it, Jax said, a note of triumph in his voice. You got in? Glarf asked, disbelief evident even with his alien features. Yeah, I got in, Jax replied, tapping a series of keys. And guess what? They're really banking on us being too stupid or scared to fight back. To be fair, that's not a bad assumption, Kira interjected, earning a few laughs. Jax focused on the streams of data, searching for anything useful. Looks like they're setting up something big. A full-scale digitization sweep, which means, Glarf asked, frowning, which means if we don't stop them, we're all going to be part of the universe's most depressing cloud storage, Jax replied. The room fell silent. The gravity of the situation was finally sinking in. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone trapped on this station, and possibly beyond. So what's the plan, Jax? Kira asked, determination in her voice. We disrupt them, Jax said. Hit their servers, mess with their data, make them question every decision they've made since deciding to mess with humanity. And if that doesn't work, Glarf pressed, then we improvise, Jax said with a shrug. Worst case, we buy time for the others to come up with something smarter. Kira nodded, determination replacing the remnants of fear in her eyes. Let's get to work then. The group set about their tasks, each contributing in whatever way they could. Jax coordinated the chaos, barking orders and offering suggestions with a sarcastic wit that kept spirits as high as they could be in a makeshift war room. For the first time since this nightmare began, Jax felt something akin to hope. A dangerous thing, hope, but it was better than despair and certainly better than doing nothing. They worked quickly, a flurry of movement and noise, each keystroke a tiny act of rebellion against the Zintrix and their plans. Jax could almost taste the tension in the air, the pressure cooker of fear and determination that drove them all. All right, Jax said, stepping back from the console. I think we're ready. Ready for what? Kira asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. Ready to make the Zintrix wish they'd picked a different hobby, Jax replied, a grin spreading across his face. The group braced themselves as Jax initiated the attack, the system humming with energy and intent. In that moment, they weren't just refugees. They were resistance fighters in the digital age, standing against a threat that sought to erase their very essence. And as the first sparks of their rebellion danced across the screens, Jax couldn't help but laugh. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes, laughter was the only response to the absurdity of it all. Let's see how they like our brand of creativity, Jax said, his voice carrying a strange mix of defiance and amusement. The universe might have had a dark sense of humor, but this time, it had underestimated the punchline. The dusty air of the data center buzzed with a cocktail of nervous energy and old machine fumes. Jax Quillen, the station's resident mad engineer, paced the room like a caged animal, eyes darting between the screens and his ragtag team of accidental rebels. He liked to think of them as a collective mess of determination and questionable life choices. Kira, the young woman with the bright eyes and scowl that could sire milk, was fiddling with a console, her fingers a blur of semi-competent hacking. She was either going to save them all or accidentally send a signal that would bring every Zintrix within 100 light-years down on their heads. Jax's money was on the ladder, but hell, hope was free. Glarf, the alien whose perpetual irritation was rivaled only by his capacity for snark, stood nearby with arms crossed, or something approximating arms. His three eyes rotated between Jax and the screens like he was watching a particularly disappointing play. You know, Jax, Glarf said, his voice the auditory version of an eye roll. If this is humanity's best and brightest, I'm starting to understand why the Zintrix think we're an expendable resource. Jax snorted. Yeah, well, they probably didn't count on us being stubborn as a rock in a dryer. Makes us unpredictable, and unpredictability is the one thing their algorithms can't crack. Algorithms, Glarf muttered, an alien equivalent to a psi. You'd think they'd have learned by now that not everything is a math problem. Tell that to the Zintrix, Kira chimed in, pointing at a particularly complex segment of code on her screen. They're trying to map human creativity like it's a freaking Sudoku puzzle. Glarf nodded sagely, or at least Jax imagined it was sage. It was hard to tell with Glarf. That's the thing with creativity. Can't bottle it, can't count on it to be logical. Like humans, really. The room fell into a rhythm of keystrokes and muttered curses, the occasional spark from the jury-rigged equipment lighting up the dim space. Jax leaned over Kira's shoulder to check their progress, squinting at the screen like it owed him money. Anything useful in there? He asked, tapping the screen and hoping none of the old wires decided to bite back. Not sure, Kira replied, but it seems the Zintrix are having a hard time getting their digital models to emulate human creativity. They're frustrated, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it. Jax couldn't help but chuckle. Leave it to humans to be the cosmic glitch in an otherwise perfect system. We're the universe's middle finger to predictability. Speaking of which, Glarf said, we're going to need more than just sarcastic commentary if we're planning to take these guys down. Jax nodded, his expression briefly serious. Agreed. But we've got one advantage. The Zintrix think we're a collection of random variables. They don't realize we're a bloody algorithm in our own right, one they can't quite decode. An algorithm of chaos, Kira added, flashing a grin that was either insane or inspired, possibly both. The console beeped loudly, making everyone in the room jump. Jax cursed under his breath, trying to steady his breathing. What the hell was that? Message intercepted, Kira said, looking at the screen. Looks like we've got some incoming data from the Zintrix network. Jax's eyebrows shot up, a rare moment of genuine surprise. Well, I'll be damned. What's it say? Kira squinted at the stream of alien script, her lips moving silently as she translated. They're trying to recruit allies. Seems like their perfect little campaign isn't going as smoothly as they'd hoped, Jax chuckled. Guess they overestimated their charm. But this could be good news for us. If they're desperate enough to reach out for help, maybe we're not as screwed as we thought, or it means they've got bigger guns pointed our way, Glarf said, always the voice of optimism. True, Jax conceded, but it also means they're not invincible. And if they can fail, then we can win. As if on cue, a new face appeared at the doorway, a tall, lanky alien with skin that shimmered like oil on water. Jax had seen her around the station, always lurking at the edges of the crowd, listening but never speaking. Need another hand? She asked, her voice smooth and oddly melodic, like a song played on a broken instrument. Jax studied her for a moment, trying to gauge whether she was an ally or a spy. The fact that she was offering help right as they'd intercepted a message from the Zintrix didn't exactly scream trustworthy. Depends, he said cautiously. You here to help us or help them? She grinned, a sharp, toothy smile that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Let's just say I'm not a fan of digitization. Prefer my mind to stay unbottled, thank you very much. That makes two of us, Kira muttered, eyeing the newcomer with suspicion. Three, Glarf added, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Jax shrugged. All right then. Welcome to the Resistance. Name's Jax. This here's Kira and Glarf. And you are, call me Lox, she replied, stepping fully into the room. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve when it comes to Zintrix tech. Great, Jax said with a nod, because we could use all the tricks we can get. With Lox's unexpected alliance, the dynamics in the cramped data center shifted, an odd camaraderie forming between these disparate souls. They didn't trust each other, not fully, but in their shared desperation, they'd found a common ground. The hours ticked by in a haze of keystrokes and whispered plans, the weight of impending doom lending a surreal edge to their efforts. Jax could feel the pressure mounting, each decision a gamble with stakes higher than he liked to think about. So what's our next move? Lox asked, her eyes never leaving the screen before her. We've got to hit them hard, Jax replied. Disrupt their networks, throw their plans into chaos, make them question every damn algorithm they've ever built. And if that doesn't work, Kira asked, echoing her earlier doubts. Then we improvise, Jax said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. We're humans after all, it's what we do best. Improvise our way into oblivion, Glarf suggested dryly. Or out of it, Jax countered, unwilling to let his bleak sense of humor overshadow the sliver of hope he clung to. With the plan set, if it could be called a plan, they set to work, each small act of rebellion a defiant stand against the Zintrix and their plans for control. The room buzzed with an energy that was part fear, part hope, and wholly human. "All right, let's see what we can do," Jack said, his hands flying over the keyboard. "Time to show the Zintrix that unpredictability isn't just a human trait, it's our superpower." And as the first sparks of their digital assault flared across the screens, Jax couldn't help but feel a twisted sort of pride. They might have been a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were his ragtag bunch, and they were going to give the universe's most advanced tech support team one hell of a headache. The data center was alive with activity, a hive of defiantly hopeful chaos. Every beep and buzz of technology felt like a battle cry, each line of code a small rebellion against the inevitable. "Think they'll see it coming?" Kira asked, a hint of fear edging her voice. "Probably not," Jax replied, a smirk tugging at his lips. "But even if they do, they won't know what hit them until it's too late." With unexpected alliances formed and a plan as reckless as it was bold, Jax and his team of unlikely heroes prepared to face whatever came next. And for the first time, the odds didn't seem quite so impossible. They were still ludicrously outmatched, sure, but there was a chance. A slim, improbable chance, but a chance nonetheless. "Let's give them hell," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid promises. And with that, they dove headfirst into the fray, determined to prove that even in the darkest corners of the universe, humanity refused to go quietly into the digital night. The briefing room was cramped, even by the generous standards of a broom closet. Jax Quillen, the station's resident mad engineer, could feel the tension in the air as thick as the dust on the unused holo display. It was the kind of atmosphere that made you wish for a gas mask or a stiff drink, maybe both. Kira sat at one end of the table, scowling at her console like it had personally wronged her. Glarf, the ever-irritated alien with 3 eyes on an eternal carousel, leaned against the wall with an expression that screamed "kill me now" in every known language. Lox, the newcomer with an enigmatic grin, hovered nearby like a ghost trying to decide whether to spook or spectate. "All right," Jax began, clearing his throat and praying for coherence. "We've got a problem. Bigger than usual. The Zintrix are ramping up their efforts. They're using more aggressive tactics to capture humans. Apparently, our delightful unpredictability has them in a tizzy." "Fantastic," Kira muttered, rolling her eyes. "So what's next?" "They're going to start offering free brain scans with every abduction. Wouldn't put it past them," Glarf said, crossing his. "Well, whatever passed for arms. They're trying to map human creativity, remember. Capture a few brains and you've got yourself a roadmap to madness. Which is why," Jax continued, ignoring the delightful banter, "we need a plan to disrupt them from within. We're not talking metaphorical wrenches here, folks. I'm proposing we go full monkey in the works on their systems." "A risky plan," Lox observed, though her tone suggested it was more of a challenge than a criticism. "Risky plans are kind of our specialty," Jax replied, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But this is gonna take some finesse." "Finesse," Kira repeated dryly. "That thing we have in spades," Glarf grunted, his eyes rotating like he was trying to find the least painful angle to stress about. "What's the catch, Jax?" "You've always got one." Jax hesitated, scratching the back of his neck, an action that suggested he already knew this was crazy, even by their standards. "We're gonna need to get inside the Zintrix systems, which means accessing their mainframe directly." "Great," Kira said. "And how do you propose we do that without getting vaporized or worse, digitized?" "Lox," Jax said, nodding towards the enigmatic newcomer. "She's got some tricks up her sleeve. If we can get her close enough, she might be able to carve us a path in. Seems I picked the right time to join this merry band of rebels," Lox said, crossing her arms. "So you're basically asking me to walk into the lion's den with a stake strapped to my back." "That's one way to phrase it," Jax replied. "But hey, you're not alone. We'll be right there with you." Or at least nearby enough to hear the screams. The room fell silent, each member of this ragtag team processing the risks, the improbability, and the potentially lethal consequences. Jax could practically hear their brains whirring, except for Glarf, whose brain probably hummed if anything. Finally, Kira broke the silence. "All right, I'm in, but if we pull this off, you owe me a new console." "This one's got more bugs than a bargain bin AI deal," Jax promised, though he had no idea how he'd keep it. Promises were cheap in a galaxy that valued human life somewhere below spare parts. Glarf sighed, or at least made a noise close enough. "I suppose I'll play along. Someone's got to document the spectacular failure of humanity's last stand." "Right, damn right," Jax said. "So let's make it a good one." With tentative agreement reached, they huddled closer, the briefing table creaking under the weight of their collective misgivings. It was time to hash out the details, to plot and scheme like their lives depended on it, because they did. "So what exactly do you need me to do?" Lox asked, her voice cutting through the murmurs of planning like a knife through stale bread. "We need you to access their mainframe," Jax explained, pointing to a crudely drawn diagram on the holo display that looked like a toddler's first attempt at abstract art. From there, you can unleash a virus we've been working on, something that'll scramble their systems, make them question everything they think they know. How poetic, Glarf remarked. Scrambling the minds of those who wish to scramble yours. I like to think of it as poetic justice, Jax replied, or just plain justice if you're not into poetry. Kira leaned over the diagram, squinting. And where exactly do we fit into this picture? Jax pointed to another part of the scroll. We're the distraction. We'll need to keep their security busy while Lox does her thing. Which means causing as much chaos as possible. Well, if there's one thing I'm good at, it's chaos, Kira said with a wry grin. Got that right, Jax agreed, clapping her on the back. So any objections, concerns, final requests? Just one, Lox said, raising a hand. If this all goes sideways, I reserve the right to say I told you so. Deal, Jax said again, nodding. Let's get to work. The atmosphere shifted, the room buzzing with renewed purpose. It was a plan born of desperation and sheer audacity, a plan that could easily blow up in their faces, but what else was new? As they set to work, each member of the team diving into their respective tasks, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this was their one shot. It was a feeling that settled in his gut like a bad meal, a reminder that the stakes were higher than they'd ever been. But failure wasn't an option, not here, not now. Glarf shuffled over, a concerned expression in his 3 eyes. You sure about this, Jax? I mean, we've pulled off some crazy stunts before, but this is different. Jax met the alien's gaze, trying to project a confidence he didn't quite feel. I know. But we've got to do something. We can't just sit here and wait for the Zintrix to pick us off one by one. And what if it doesn't work? Glarf asked, not unkindly. Then we'll improvise, Jax replied, echoing the sentiment that had become their unofficial motto. We're humans, remember. Making it up as we go along is kind of our thing. With that, they returned to their tasks. Each keystroke and whispered plan a testament to their determination. The hours passed in a blur, the weight of their impending showdown with the Zintrix hanging over them like a storm cloud. Finally, as the last pieces of their plan clicked into place, Jax gathered them for one final briefing. It was time to take the fight to the Zintrix, to prove that even in the darkest corners of the universe, humanity refused to be digitized into oblivion. All right, he said, looking each of them in the eye. This is it. We're about to take on the biggest, baddest tech support team in the galaxy. Any last words? Just one, Glarf said, his voice a strange mix of resignation and resolve. Let's make sure they remember why they should have just left us alone. Couldn't have put it better myself, Jax replied with a wry smile. All right, team, let's give them hell. And with that, they moved out, a motley crew of rebels armed with nothing but their wits and a plan that could either save them or destroy them. But for Jax and his ragtag band of misfits, it was all or nothing. They had no choice but to bet it all on this one improbable shot at freedom. As they made their way through the station's labyrinthine corridors, Jax couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. They might be a collection of stubborn fools, but they were his stubborn fools, and they were about to make history, one way or another. The data center loomed ahead, a monolithic structure that seemed to pulse with the hum of alien technology. It was their target, the heart of the Zintrix's operations, and their best hope for turning the tide. All right, Lox, Jax said, turning to the newcomer. This is your show. Ready to do your thing? Born ready, Lox replied, her sharp smile cutting through the tension. Just make sure you keep their security off my back. We'll do our best, Jax promised, though he knew that might not be enough. But hell, they'd come this far. No turning back now. As Lox slipped into the shadows, Jax, Kira, and Glarf took their positions, preparing to unleash chaos on the unsuspecting Zintrix. It was a plan as bold as it was reckless, but with any luck, it would be enough. And so they began, each move a calculated gamble, each decision a step deeper into the unknown. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the right to be human, to be unpredictable, to be free. Kira's fingers danced over her console, her hacking skills put to the ultimate test. Glarf provided cover, his snarky commentary a welcome distraction from the tension that threatened to suffocate them. Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea, Glarf asked, half joking, half serious. Because we're idiots, Jax replied, grinning despite himself. But we're the best kind of idiots. The Zintrix's security systems flared to life, alarms blaring as their plan set off a chain reaction of digital chaos. It was working, at least for now, and that was enough. Lox, how's it going? Jax called over the comms, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Almost there, Lox replied, her voice calm and steady. Just keep them busy a little longer. Copy that, Jax said, steeling himself for whatever came next. The minutes stretched into eternity, each second a new challenge, a new hurdle to overcome. But they persevered, driven by a shared determination that defied the odds stacked against them. Finally, Lox's voice crackled over the comms, a note of triumph in her tone. I'm in, deploying the virus now. Jax felt a surge of hope, a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Good job, Lox, now get out of there. We'll cover your exit. As they moved to regroup, the Zintrix network began to unravel, their carefully crafted algorithms thrown into disarray by the virus they'd unleashed. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Looks like it's working, Kira said, her voice tinged with disbelief. We're actually doing it. Damn right we are, Jax replied, the weight of their accomplishment settling in. Now let's get out of here before the Zintrix figure out what hit them. With their mission complete, they retreated into the shadows, leaving chaos and confusion in their wake. It was a risky plan, a dangerous gamble, but it had paid off in ways they hadn't dared to hope. As they made their way back to the safety of the station's hidden corridors, Jax felt a sense of relief wash over him. They'd done it. They'd taken on the Zintrix and lived to tell the tale, proving that even in the darkest corners of the universe, humanity refused to go quietly into the digital night. Think they'll come after us? Glarf asked, casting a wary glance over his shoulder. Probably, Jax admitted, but we'll be ready for them. We've got unpredictability on our side, remember? Yes, Kira said, her grin returning. And if there's one thing the universe can't handle, it's a bunch of unpredictable humans with nothing left to lose. With a renewed sense of purpose, they pressed on, ready to face whatever came next. The odds were still against them, the challenges ahead daunting, but Jax and his ragtag team of rebels were undeterred. They'd started something bigger than themselves, and they weren't about to back down now. It was time to reclaim their future, one unpredictable step at a time. The cramped corridors of Wormhole Station 47 felt even tighter as the weight of their failure pressed down on Jax and his ragtag team. The plan had blown up in their faces faster than a malfunctioning flux regulator, though you could argue those two things were one and the same. The virus Lox had so confidently unleashed had done little more than tickle the Zintrix systems before fizzling out like a damp sparkler. And now, several of their crew were missing, likely captured by the ever-efficient Zintrix. Talk about a rough day at the office. Jax leaned against a wall, running a hand through his hair, which sported a new shade of stressed-out engineer. He stared at the floor, refusing to meet the concerned gaze of Glarf, who was giving him a look that said, "Told you so," with all three eyes. So what's Plan B? Glarf asked, his voice laced with sarcasm, because of course there had never been a Plan B. Simple, Jax replied, forcing a grin. We improvise again, Kira, sitting cross-legged next to a pile of their jerry-rigged equipment, scoffed. Improvisation, huh? Like the time you improvised a new circuit breaker and nearly fried us all. Hey, that was a learning experience, Jax shot back. Well, we've certainly learned something today, Glarf added dryly. The Zintrix have a backup plan for their backup plans. Lox, appearing from the shadows with an expression that screamed oops, shrugged. In my defense, that was the most secure system I've ever hacked, and I've hacked Galactic banking networks, so that's saying something. Right, Jax said, eyes scanning the room, landing on each of his disheartened comrades. We knew the Zintrix were smart. Smarter than us, clearly, but we have something they don't. Let me guess, Kira said. An unhealthy reliance on caffeine and poor life choices. Exactly, Jax said. And unpredictability. If we're going down, let's at least give them a headache. The remaining members of their team, who hadn't been nabbed by the ever-efficient tentacles of fate, were scattered around the makeshift hideout. It was like a reunion of defeat, with everyone pretending not to notice the metaphorical doom looming over them. Okay, Jax continued, attempting to sound more confident than he felt. The Zintrix systems are nearly complete. They're close to locking down human creativity forever, but we're still here and we've got one last shot. Glarf raised an eyebrow. I'm all for last stands, but what do you have in mind? Another virus, perhaps, maybe one that actually works this time. No more viruses. We need something bigger, something they won't see coming, Jax said, though the specifics were still playing hide-and-seek with his neurons. Like what? Lox asked, crossing her arms. Well, Jax said, tapping his chin thoughtfully. If we can't out-hack them, maybe we can outsmart them. We need a distraction, not just any distraction, but a cosmic-level clusterfuck. Kira stifled a laugh. Aren't those what we're best at? Exactly my point, Jax said. We need to make enough noise that they can't help but look away from their precious systems. Noise, Glarf repeated. You mean explosions, don't you? Jax shrugged. I'm not ruling it out. But it's more about misdirection. We make them think the threat is elsewhere while we hit them where it hurts. And where's that? Lox asked. Their pride. We hit them with something so chaotic, so human they won't know what to do with it, Jax said, warming to the idea. Glarf sighed. You do realize we're talking about outsmarting a species that considers the laws of physics a mild inconvenience. True, Jax admitted, but we've got something they don't have. Heart, Kira suggested in a rare moment of optimism. Arrogance, Jax corrected, grinning. The best kind of arrogance, human arrogance. Lox nodded slowly. Okay, I'm in. What's the plan then? Jax took a deep breath, a smile tugging at his lips. We're going to give the Zintrix a little taste of human unpredictability. The team gathered around him, a motley crew of defiance and desperation, ready to throw everything they had left into one final gambit. They might be beaten, battered, and on the verge of giving up, but as long as they were breathing, they'd keep fighting. With their plan forming, they moved through the station's labyrinthine corridors once more, a ragtag group of misfits with nothing left to lose. Each step was a reminder of the stakes, the risks, and the slim chance they had of pulling this off. Jax led them to a section of the station rarely used since the Zintrix had taken over. It was a graveyard of outdated technology, a place where dreams went to die, much like Jax's love life. "Right," he said, clapping his hands together. "We're going to need to make a lot of noise, both digital and physical. Who's up for repurposing some of this junk?" Kira surveyed the discarded tech with a critical eye. "You want us to weaponize obsolete tech? That's either brilliant or suicidal. Why not both?" Jax said with a wink. As they got to work, the air filled with the sound of whirring tools and snarky banter. They had no guarantees, no assurances, but they had each other and a shared determination not to go quietly. The plan was simple: create enough chaos to draw the Zintrix's attention, while Lox took another shot at their systems. This time, though, they'd give her the opening she needed to really make an impact. With any luck, they'd shake the Zintrix's confidence enough to buy themselves some time. "Hey, Jax," Glarf called, holding up a piece of equipment that looked like it had been cobbled together by a toddler with a penchant for glue. "What do you think?" "Enough to make a bang. If it doesn't, I'll eat my own boots," Jax replied, knowing full well that Glarf's creations usually had more bark than bite, but that was precisely the point. As they continued to work, Jax couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, a stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. "Remind me," Kira said, not looking up from her work. "Why do we keep doing this?" "Fighting against impossible odds," Jax paused, considering. "Because we're human and humans don't know when to quit," Glarf snorted. "You say that like it's a good thing." "It is," Jax insisted. "It's what makes us more than just data points and algorithms. It's what makes us dangerous and stubborn," Lox added with a smirk. "Exactly," Jax said, nodding. "We might be outmatched, outgunned, and out of time, but we're not out of ideas." With their plan taking shape, they prepared for what could very well be their last stand. They were ready to face the Zintrix, to show them that humanity wouldn't be digitized without a fight. The final preparations in place, the team gathered for one last briefing. It was a solemn moment, one filled with the understanding that this could be their end or their greatest triumph. "All right," Jax said, looking each of them in the eye. "This is it. Time to show the Zintrix what humanity's really made of. Any last words?" "Just one," Glarf said, his usual sarcasm tempered with a note of seriousness. "Let's make sure they know who they're dealing with." With that, they set their plans into motion, each step a defiant challenge to the odds stacked against them. They might have been pushed to the brink, but they weren't broken, not yet. As the first explosions rocked the station, Jax felt a surge of adrenaline, a fierce determination that burned in his chest. They were doing it, making the impossible possible, defying the inevitability of defeat. The Zintrix would learn that humanity wasn't just a collection of predictable patterns and comprehensible data. They were chaos and creativity, unpredictability and rebellion, and they weren't going down without a fight. Jax took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. They were at their darkest hour, the brink of defeat hanging over them like a storm cloud, but as long as they had breath in their lungs, they would keep fighting, because that's what it meant to be human. As the chaos unfolded, Lox slipped into position, her fingers dancing over the controls once more. This time, though, she had the element of surprise, and a team willing to throw everything they had into the fight. "Jax," Lox's voice crackled over the comms, a note of excitement in her tone. "I found a vulnerability. I'm going in. Do it," Jax replied, his heart pounding as he kept an eye on the unfolding chaos around them. "We're counting on you." As their plan unfolded, each explosion and digital disruption a testament to their determination, Jax felt a flicker of hope, a belief that they could turn the tide, that they could defy the odds. Glarf, standing next to him, watched the chaos with a satisfied grin. "You know, Jax, if we make it out of this alive, I'm going to need a vacation." "Join the club," Jax replied, grinning back. "But first, let's make sure we've got a universe left to vacation in." Together, they prepared to face the Zintrix's inevitable response, ready to fight for their freedom, for their humanity. They might be outmatched, but they weren't out of hope, not yet. As the Zintrix systems began to falter, their grip on the station weakening, Jax felt a surge of pride for his team, his friends. They'd come this far, defied the odds, and now they were about to make history. Whatever happened next, Jax knew one thing for sure: they wouldn't go quietly into the digital night, not when there was so much left to fight for. "All right, everyone," Jax said, his voice steady and resolute. "Let's show the Zintrix what it means to be human." And with that, they faced the storm head-on, ready to fight for their future, for their freedom, and for the right to be unpredictable, creative, and gloriously, stubbornly human. Jax had always believed in the power of human ingenuity, or at least in its ability to create impressive messes. As he stared at the chaotic assembly of jerry-rigged technology before him, he felt a twinge of pride. This was the pinnacle of human achievement, turning trash into slightly more dangerous trash. "All right, folks," Jax said, his voice echoing off the grimy walls of their hideout. "I've found a little crack in the Zintrix systems. Turns out they're not as infallible as they like to think. Did you find this crack or did you make it?" Kira asked, fiddling with a misaligned piece of tech that looked like it might explode if someone sneezed on it too hard. Jax shrugged. "A little of both, maybe. You know me, always digging until something breaks." Glarf chimed in, his three-eyed gaze skeptical. "And this crack? It won't bring the whole station down on our heads, will it?" "Depends on your definition of down," Jax replied. "Think of it more like a controlled demolition. We're aiming to make their systems implode, not us." Lox looked up from her station, where her fingers flitted over the keyboard with an elegance that belied the madness around them. "What's the plan?" "Distract them with enough noise and then I dive into their systems." "Exactly," Jax nodded. "Only this time we're not just going for noise, we're going for a full-blown symphony of chaos." "Music to my ears," Glarf muttered, though the sarcasm was thick enough to spread on toast. Jax took a moment to look at each of them, this oddball family he'd somehow managed to cobble together. "Look, I know this is risky. I know we're outnumbered, out-teched, out-everything, but this is where we show them what human creativity looks like. Unpredictable, irrational, and often involving explosions," Kira asked. "Exactly," Jax beamed, "and that's our advantage. The Zintrix might understand the universe, but they don't understand us. They can't map human creativity because it doesn't follow their rules." Lox leaned back in her chair, a grin spreading across her face. "So we're going to break the rules. We're going to obliterate them," Jax said, his own grin matching hers. "And we're going to start by hitting their pride. We're going to show them that humans aren't just resources to be digitized. We're chaos incarnate." Glarf raised his hand. "Just a small logistical question. How exactly do you plan on doing that without getting us all killed?" Jax pointed to the jumbled mess of tech. "We use their own arrogance against them. They think they've got everything figured out, but they never accounted for us. We're going to give them a show they'll never forget." Kira sighed, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm in. If we're going down, might as well go down in a blaze of glory. That's the spirit." Jax clapped his hands, ignoring the creeping anxiety that gnawed at the edges of his mind. "Let's get to work." As they set about their tasks, the room filled with the whir and clatter of tools, punctuated by the occasional curse when something inevitably went wrong. Jax marveled at how, even in the face of the end, humans were capable of such irreverent brilliance. It was like watching a circus act where the performers were just as likely to saw off their own limbs as pull off a successful trick. Glarf, ever the skeptic, was the first to voice his doubts again. "You sure this is going to work, Jax?" "I mean, they are the ones who made chaos control an art form. That's the thing, Glarf," Jax said, soldering two dubious-looking wires together. "They understand controlled chaos, but we're going to give them the raw, unfiltered kind. The kind that comes with no safety net, and probably no functional exit strategy," Glarf added dryly. "Exit strategies are for people who plan on not dying," Jax shot back. "And last I checked, we didn't have that luxury." Kira glanced up from her project. "I love how our plan has basically become wing it and hope for the best." "That's always been the plan," Jax admitted. "The only difference is now we might actually make it work." As the final pieces came together, Jax gathered them around for one last rundown. The station may have been a ticking time bomb, their lives hanging by the thinnest of threads, but he'd be damned if they weren't going to give it everything they had. "All right, folks," Jax said, channeling every ounce of confidence he didn't actually possess. "Time to light this fuse and see what happens." With a collective nod, they moved to their positions, ready to unleash the culmination of their haphazard genius. The plan was simple, if not exactly foolproof. Create a distraction big enough to divert the Zintrix's attention, then slip through the cracks and dismantle their system from the inside. No pressure. As the first explosions shook the station, Jax felt a thrill of adrenaline. It was working. Somehow it was actually working. The Zintrix, so confident in their control, were scrambling to contain the chaos. Lox's voice crackled through the comms, her excitement palpable. "I'm in, Jax. I'm deeper in their systems than a tick on a bloodhound." "Then let's make sure they itch," Jax replied, watching the displays as the station's systems flickered and glitched. "Remind me to never get on your bad side," Kira said, her eyes scanning the chaos around them. Glarf chuckled. "You mean this isn't his bad side?" Jax ignored them, focused on maintaining their precarious advantage. It was all or nothing now. They were playing a high-stakes game with everything on the line. The Zintrix, for all their planning and precision, hadn't accounted for the sheer unpredictability of human desperation, and as their systems faltered and flickered, Jax knew they'd hit a nerve. "Okay, Glarf," Jax called out. "Time to bring the noise." With a nod, Glarf activated the next phase of their plan. Across the station, makeshift devices built from scraps and salvaged tech sprang to life, filling the corridors with blaring sounds and flashing lights. It was a sensory overload, designed to confuse and disorient. "How's that for a cosmic-level clusterfuck?" Glarf shouted over the din, looking equal parts terrified and exhilarated. "Beautiful," Jax replied, though his heart raced in his chest. It was working, but for how long? That was the real question. As the chaos enveloped them, Jax's mind raced. They'd bought themselves time, but they needed to make it count. Every second was precious, every moment a chance to turn the tide. Lox's voice came through again, urgent but determined. "I've got it, Jax. Their digitization program's exposed. We can shut it down." Jax's heart leapt. They were so close. "Do it, Lox." Cut it off at the knees. As Lox worked her magic, the Zintrix's hold on the station began to unravel. Systems flickered and failed, their digital tendrils retracting as the virus took root. Jax could hardly believe it. They were doing it. They were really doing it. "Jax," Kira shouted, snapping him back to reality. "We've got company." Sure enough, Zintrix enforcers were converging on their position, drawn by the chaos and noise. They were out of time. "All right, team," Jax called, rallying them for one last push. "Let's give them hell." As the Zintrix closed in, Jax and his team fought with everything they had. It was a desperate, brutal struggle, but they were fueled by the knowledge that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for their future, for their freedom, and for the right to remain defiantly, gloriously human. In the midst of the chaos, Jax felt a strange calm settle over him. They'd done the impossible, defied the odds, and shown the universe what humanity was capable of. And as the Zintrix fell back, their systems in disarray, Jax knew that they'd won, at least for now. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they were still standing. And as long as they were standing, they would keep fighting, because that was the human way. The air inside Wormhole Station 47's data center was thick with the scent of old machine fumes and the collective breath of alien refugees packed in like sardines. It was the kind of environment that could turn your sinus cavities into a war zone. Jax Quillen, the station's resident mad engineer, surveyed the chaos with a kind of irreverent reverence, if such a thing were possible. "All right, gang," Jax said, his voice cutting through the din like a rusty sawblade. Time to give the Zintrix their farewell performance. Kira, ever the skeptic, was crouched beside a console that looked suspiciously like it had been jerry-rigged from a mix of 21st-century toaster parts and surplus alien tech. "If this blows up in our faces, I want it on record that I told you so." "Noted," Jax replied, his tone so dry it might have combusted in less humid air. Glarf, with those three skeptical eyes of his, was fiddling with a flux regulator that had seen better days. "You know, I've learned not to ask how your plans work. I just accept that they occasionally don't." Jax grinned, a wicked glint in his eye. "And that's why you're my favorite pessimist, Glarf." Lox was already deep in the Zintrix systems, her fingers dancing over the cracked keyboard with a kind of manic grace. "I'm in deeper than a politician's pockets, Jax. Just say the word." "The word is let's this station not explode," Jax replied, his tone as irreverent as ever. He glanced around at his team, this ragtag collection of misfits and outlaws that somehow kept the universe from collapsing on their heads. "Remember, folks, we're not just breaking their systems, we're breaking their pride. And possibly their digital spines." "Touching," Kira muttered, but there was a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. With a nod, Jax initiated the hack. The Zintrix were about to get a front-row seat to the unpredictable brilliance that was human ingenuity, or, as Jax liked to call it, winging it with style. The first phase was simple: introduce enough chaos within the Zintrix's digital domain to make a hyperactive squirrel look like a strategic mastermind. Screens flickered to life, displaying an onslaught of memes that would have been considered war crimes against sanity. The Zintrix, with their algorithmic obsession for order, couldn't process the randomness. It was like trying to read Shakespeare while a clown juggled chainsaws in your peripheral vision. "How's that for chaos, huh?" Jax asked, a smug grin on his face. "It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion," Glarf replied, each eye conveying its own unique brand of skepticism. The station shook as the Zintrix attempted to counter the attack with their usual efficiency. However, they hadn't accounted for Jax's brand of madness. Every time they tried to patch a breach, a new one opened. It was like playing whack-a-mole with a sledgehammer and 20 moles. Kira was focused on her display, a mix of concentration and exasperation etched on her face. "Jax, this is either going to be brilliant or catastrophic." "Why not both?" Jax replied, his voice a mix of bravado and sheer audacity. Meanwhile, Lox navigated the Zintrix systems with the elegance of a cat burglar who'd just discovered a room full of shiny things. I'm through to their core systems, Jax. The digitization program is wide open. Then do your thing, Lox, Jax said, his tone encouragingly chaotic. Show them what happens when they mess with human creativity. As Lox worked her magic, Jax took a moment to appreciate the madness surrounding him. They were deep in enemy territory, outmatched, outgunned, and out of their minds. It was glorious. Incoming, Kira shouted, snapping Jax back to reality. Zintrix enforcers were now pouring into the data center, their sleek forms cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. Time for some good old-fashioned improvisation, Jax said, grabbing a makeshift weapon that resembled a cross between a flamethrower and a garden hose. The ensuing battle was a blur of flashing lights, shouted commands, and the unmistakable sound of technology being used in ways it was never intended. Jax and his crew fought with the reckless abandon of people who knew they were on borrowed time, each punch and shot fueled by the knowledge that they were fighting for something worth more than their own lives. Glarf, leveraging his natural skepticism, was a surprisingly efficient fighter, using his multifaceted view of the battlefield to outmaneuver and outthink their opponents. I can't believe this is working, he muttered, ducking under a stray energy bolt. Believe it, Jax replied, grinning like a maniac as he repurposed a piece of destroyed tech into a makeshift grenade. We're winning, don't jinx it, Kira warned, but even she couldn't hide the hint of excitement in her voice. The Zintrix were faltering, their usual precise coordination disrupted by the sheer unpredictability of human tactics. Each of Jax's team brought their own brand of chaos to the fight, and the Zintrix simply couldn't cope. Lox's voice crackled through the comms, triumphant. Digitization program is down, Jax. We're officially a pain in their ass. Jax whooped, a sound that was half victory celebration and half defiance. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. All right, team, Jax called, rallying his forces for the final push. Let's make sure they remember this day. With renewed vigor, they pressed the attack, turning the tide against the Zintrix. The enemy's lines broke, and the once orderly invaders were now in disarray. Keep pushing, Kira shouted, her voice a rallying cry. For every algorithm they throw at us, we throw back twice the chaos, and so they did. They fought like demons, each moment edged with the possibility of failure, but also with the thrill of possibility. They were human after all, impossible to predict, impossible to contain. As the last of the Zintrix forces retreated, Jax and his team stood victorious, battered but unbroken. They'd done the impossible, and they'd done it with style. You know, Jax, Locke said, brushing sweat from her brow, I might just start believing in your crazy plans. Jax chuckled, the sound more weary than amused. Don't go soft on me now, Lox. There's still plenty of chaos left to sow. Glarf surveyed the carnage with his usual skepticism. So what's next, fearless leader? Well, Jax said, leaning against a console with a satisfied smirk, I figure we give the Zintrix a little more to chew on. Let them know that humanity isn't just a resource to be digitized. Kira shook her head, but there was admiration in her eyes. You know, Jax, for a guy who makes everything up as he goes along, you sure know how to make it look good. That's the trick, Kira, Jax replied, his grin infectious. When in doubt, improvise. When improvising, make it look intentional. And as they stood there, surrounded by the evidence of their triumph, smoke rising, screens flickering, and the remnants of their makeshift arsenal, Jax knew that they'd done more than just survive. They'd shown the universe what humans were capable of when pushed to the brink. They were chaos incarnate, unpredictability personified. And as long as they drew breath, they'd keep fighting against the odds because that was the human way. They would never be just a line of code in an alien database. They were human and they were glorious. With one last glance at his team, Jax turned towards the exit, the fires of rebellion still burning bright in his eyes. The battle was theirs, but the war was far from over. Come on, team, he said, leading them into the unknown. Let's show the universe what chaos really looks like. Jax Quillen surveyed Wormhole Station 47 like a general, inspecting a battlefield after the smoke had cleared, which wasn't far from the truth. His team had pulled off the kind of victory that legends were made of, or at least the kind that you'd tell over way too many drinks to a skeptical audience. The air was still thick with the scent of burnt circuits and that peculiar alien musk that stuck around like a bad joke. The Zintrix had been given a black eye, but the station itself was a mess, a hive of activity, as its inhabitants began the arduous task of rebuilding. This wasn't Jax's first rodeo with chaos and destruction, but it was the first time he'd felt a glimmer of hope in a long time. Even if hope was an old, cynical bastard with a whiskey-soaked voice and a tendency to disappear when you needed it most. So, are we writing the book, How to Save the Universe with a Toaster Next? Kira asked, sidling up beside him. She looked as worn out as a discount space mattress, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. If the royalties pay off my tab at the Rusty Nebula, I'm in, Jax replied, a lopsided grin tugging at his lips. They both knew that wasn't likely, given that most of the universe had decided currency was an outdated concept and preferred trading in favors, secrets, and occasionally extremely questionable substances. Glarf approached, his three eyes doing their usual dance of skepticism. I suppose this is where we all sing Kumbaya and hold a group hug, he asked, the sarcasm dripping like alien drool. Only if Kumbaya is code for let's get the hell out of here before the Zintrix decide to come back for round 2, Jack shot back. But we could hold hands if you're feeling sentimental, pass. I'm allergic to sentiment, Glarf muttered, his gaze sweeping over the makeshift repairs happening all around them. And apparently manual labor, Jax watched as different species worked side by side, a colorful blend of limbs, tentacles, and other appendages. It was like watching a cosmic version of an old Earth circus, except nobody was charging admission. They were patching up holes, fixing consoles, and trying to make the station home again. It was an ugly process, full of jury-rigging and desperate improvisation, but it was happening, and that, Jack supposed, was something. Lox emerged from the depths of tangled wires and flickering screens, looking like she'd just won a wrestling match with a particularly stubborn algorithm. So are we heroes now, or did we just ruin a perfectly good plan for galaxy-wide digital enslavement? Heroes is such a strong word, Jax replied, scratching the back of his neck. I prefer glorified troublemakers, or those idiots who messed up the Zintrix's day. Catchy, Lox said with a smirk. If they start writing songs about us, I'm requesting they skip the verses about how I nearly blew up the station. Hey, near explosions are the hallmark of any good plan, Jax said, winking. It's all about keeping things exciting. The battered crew took a moment to appreciate the organized chaos around them. Jax felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mix of pride and relief. The kind you get when you've just managed to survive a particularly nasty asteroid shower without losing any limbs. So what happens now? Kira asked, crossing her arms and turning serious. Now, Jax echoed, glancing around as if searching for answers in the grime and grit of the station. Now we rebuild, we regroup, we get ready for whatever comes next. The Zintrix won't stay down for long, but they're licking their wounds. Gives us time to fortify, maybe even figure out how to get them off our backs for good. Lox nodded, a thoughtful look crossing her face. And what about the refugees? They're gonna need more than just a patched-up station. Yeah, well, we're gonna need more duct tape, Jax said dryly. And possibly some new toaster parts, Glarf snorted. So the same plan as always then, Jax spread his arms wide. What can I say? When you find a plan that somehow doesn't kill you, you stick with it. Despite the gravity of their situation, there was a shared chuckle among the group. It was a small thing, a brief respite from the heavy reality they faced, but it was enough. Enough to remind them that they were still here, still fighting. And as long as they could still laugh in the face of the universe's bullshit, they had a chance. Jax's comlink buzzed, and he glanced down at the cracked display. A message from the station's interim council, an annoyingly bureaucratic bunch who nevertheless had the unenviable job of keeping things functional. They want an update on our progress, Jax said, rolling his eyes. Or a report on how badly we've screwed things up. Tell them we've improved the station's feng shui with an avant-garde approach, Kira suggested, not missing a beat. That should confuse them long enough for us to make a sandwich. Perfect. I'll get on that right after I finish this imaginary drink, Jax replied, miming a toast with an invisible cup. Speaking of drinks, I'm gonna need something strong once we get a breather, Lox said, rubbing her temples. Something that'll erase the memory of staring into the abyss of code for far too long, Jax chuckled. I think that's called amnesia, but I hear it's hard to come by these days. The camaraderie, though tinged with weariness, was a balm for their battered spirits. They'd faced down the Zintrix and lived to tell the tale. More than that, they'd found a way to fight back, to remind the universe that humans and their ragtag band of allies weren't just data points to be manipulated. Jax turned his gaze to the stars beyond the station's viewport, the endless expanse of space a constant reminder of both their insignificance and their potential. I might actually believe we can pull this off, he said quietly. Not getting soft on us, are you, Jax? Kira teased, though her smile was genuine. Never, Jax replied with mock seriousness. I'm still an irreverent bastard at heart. But maybe, just maybe, we're more than that. Glarf rolled his eyes, all three of them. Great. Next thing you know, we'll be starting a galactic therapy group. That'd require more time and sanity than we've got to spare, Lox pointed out. Besides, I'm pretty sure the universe's problems can't be fixed with a couch and some deep breathing. Jax nodded, a small wry smile curling his lips. True enough, but maybe we can at least keep it from falling apart long enough for the next generation to take a whack at it. Kira clapped him on the shoulder. For a guy who usually wings it, you've got a knack for landing on your feet. Call it a gift, Jax said, raising an imaginary glass once more. To chaos then, and to whatever the hell comes next. To chaos, the others echoed, their voices mingling with the hum of activity around them. With that, they turned back to the work ahead. There were alliances to forge, repairs to make, and plans to devise, each step a testament to their resilience, their adaptability, and their sheer bloody-minded determination to survive. Jax led them, a reluctant hero with grease-stained hands and a heart full of defiance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to stand up against the darkness, to push back against the odds, and to carve out a future in a universe that seemed hell-bent on grinding them down. And as the station's inhabitants continued their work, Jax knew one thing for certain: whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. Laughing in the face of danger, thumbing their noses at fate, and proving time and time again that human creativity was a force to be reckoned with. In the end, that was the real victory. Not the battles won or the enemies thwarted, but the simple, undeniable truth that they were here, alive, and fighting for a place in the stars. "Hey, Jax," Glarf shouted, pulling him from his musings. "You coming, or are you just gonna stand there contemplating the vastness of space?" Jax shook his head, grinning as he joined his crew. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Glarf. Wouldn't miss it for the world."